Vast influx of borrowed money into the stock market created more demand for shares, pushing prices ever upwards. In 1928, the market went up by almost 50% in just 12 months. And as stocks continued to rise, more and more investors borrowed money to get a piece of the action. One of them was shoeshine boy Pat Bologna.
My father didn't have a lot of money in the stock market. He told me at the time he had about $6,000 in cash. But remember, $6,000 in cash translated into a lot of stock, because in those years you only had to put 10% down for margin. So at $6,000 you could have $60,000 worth of stock.
Wall Street was hungry for new punters. There was one group of would-be investors that the street had always ignored, but whose money it now wanted.
Up until the 1920s, women had played a very small role in the stock market. Part of this was simply gender prejudice. They were considered incapable of the kind of cool sang-froid that was necessary if you speculated in the market. But in the 20s, part of the popularization of the stock market included huge numbers of women.
Well, the 20s were a big time for women anyway. They really stepped out on their own. They began to take control of their own money. They went to college, actually, in record numbers in the 1920s. And as they did that, they also got interested in the stock market, and it is a way for them to build their own wealth.
One such investor was a pioneering New York photographer called Alice Austin. She lived on Staten Island, just across the water from Wall Street.
She had moved into this house when she was a couple of months old. She was bright, she was adventurous. By the time she was 11, she had received a camera, which was a new invention by the time, and she immediately took to it. Over the years, she took some 8,000 glass plate negatives, making her one of America's earliest and most prolific photographers.
Alice's inheritance from her grandfather had funded a comfortable lifestyle, but it had dwindled by the 1920s, and she was tempted by Wall Street's promise of a quick buck.
So Alice Austin discovers that she's running a little low, and the question then becomes what to do. Her friends urged her to be conservative, cut some spending, maybe not go to Europe, maybe not buy a car. Instead, Alice found a broker who advised her no, buy stocks, become rich quick. And you know what? You can borrow money so you can buy even more stocks, buying on margin. And Alice Austin thought that, hey, sounds like a good idea to me.
Throughout the soaring market of the 1920s, the Republican Party stayed in power on the back of America's increasing prosperity. Calvin Coolidge became president in 1923. An investor himself, he was notably silent on the speculative mania gripping Wall Street.
Calvin Coolidge typifies the laissez-faire, devil-may-care recklessness of the 1920s. He's famous for saying that the business of America is business.
It was a prosperous period. Business was making money. Wall Street was making money. The politicians, I think, just said, well, everything's fine. The economy's growing. The market takes care of things pretty well, and the government's job is to get out of the way.
During the Coolidge presidency, Wall Street's power continued to grow unchecked. His administration had close links with an elite group of bankers and financiers, Wall Street's inner circle. Their wealth and connections gave them immense influence over the government's financial policy.
They were small, elite, private partnerships. This was really the royalty of Wall Street. These were very mysterious and discreet places. They were small firms with limited capital, but they exercised really an outsized power.
The most prestigious of these elite firms was the J.P. Morgan Bank. Strategically located directly opposite the stock exchange, it would play a key role in events to come. As senior partner at J.P. Morgan, Thomas Lamont was the most powerful man on Wall Street. his influence extended well beyond New York. Lamont and the other J.P. Morgan partners spoke regularly with successive presidents.
Grandfather was a very, very busy man. He didn't have time, as some grandfathers might, to take his grandson to the baseball game or go fishing and do things like that. Grandfather's lifestyle was certainly a very handsome lifestyle, there's no question about it. He did have his yacht, the Rennet, which was a 72-foot, very handsome yacht, which he often would cruise down from his house in Palisades, commuting by boat, if you will, down the Hudson River to Wall Street and then walk up to the bank.
Under Lamont's leadership, J.P. Morgan steered clear of the worst excesses of the stock market. But the close relationship between elite bankers and politicians helped keep government regulation of Wall Street to a minimum. While amateur speculators were transfixed by the soaring value of their investments, they were hopelessly unaware of how Wall Street really worked. With little government supervision, the market was a law unto itself, and insider dealing was rife.
There was a lot of market manipulation going on. It was rampant. There was no disclosure at all to speak of. And when Wall Street was very small and very self-contained, that was probably okay. But as people like you and me began to put our hard-earned money into the market, then it really mattered.
The stock market of the 1920s was neither fair nor democratic. It was a big gambling casino, and it was rigged by professional speculators.
As smaller investors gambled with their life savings, they failed to realize that the odds were stacked against them. Men like Joseph Kennedy did not make their fortunes by simply picking the right stocks. The truth was that they were cashing in on the naivety of gullible newcomers.
A bunch of sharp speculators would get together. In coordinated fashion, they would start quietly but relentlessly buying an individual stock.
What they would do is hype up a particular stock, buy it up themselves, and then dump it on the market so that they took the profits while the average investor in those stocks were left with the losings.
Even some of the elite investment houses on Wall Street were engaged in this type of market manipulation.
In March of 1929, a new Republican President, Herbert Hoover, was inaugurated. In his address, he reassured Americans.
We have reached a higher degree of comfort and security than ever existed before in the history of the world.
But behind the scenes, he was less confident.
Hoover is actually skeptical about what's going on Wall Street and the economy generally. But he doesn't have the political courage of his convictions. And so when he becomes president, he does nothing to rein in this wild speculative fervor. He doesn't do anything to encourage the Federal Reserve or the Treasury to tighten up margin speculation in the stock market.
In private, Hoover talked of an orgy of speculation, but like his predecessor Coolidge, he had no appetite for regulation of the marketplace. Yet Hoover was not alone in his fears that the stock market bubble might be about to burst. Days after the inauguration speech, a prominent and highly respected banker, Paul Warburg, broke ranks with the Wall Street aristocracy and issued a bleak warning.
If orgies of unrestrained speculation are permitted to spread too far, the ultimate collapse is certain to bring about a general depression involving the entire country.
My great-grandfather issued a warning in March of 1929. He actually used the word a depression, and he was shouted down. I think he was disregarded. He was, a party pooper. I mean, no, everything's fine.
Everybody's making money and having a good time at the party. So when there's a good bull market going on, the person who says this might be getting overvalued, you better be careful, he's sort of dismissed.
Smiling at me, nothing but little blue skies. Do I see? Do, bluebird.
Warburg's prediction fell on deaf ears. And between May and September 1929, 60 new companies were floated on the New York Stock Exchange, adding more than 100 million shares to the marketplace, fueling the investment bubble.
You hear the same things in every bubble. This time is different. It's a different financial world. It's a new financial world. In fact, Groucho Marx went to his broker at some point and said, I just don't understand how these prices just keep going up. And the broker said to him, well, you just have to understand that it's a global economy now. And this was 1928, 1929. Gee, I think I've heard that sometime since then.
Some professional speculators sensed that the market was overheating. The more astute got out during the summer.
One day, apparently, Joe Kennedy, according to Joe Kennedy's later recollections, he said, if the shoeshine guy knows as much as I do about the stock market, maybe it's time for me to get out.
In September, the market became increasingly volatile. Behind closed doors, President Hoover's unease was growing.
Herbert Hoover did keep making inquiries among his Wall Street friends, asking if he should be concerned, and he received a memo from Thomas W. Lamont, who was the senior partner of J.P. Morgan and Company.
Grandfather said in that letter, the market will correct itself, and there would not appear to be any need for any kind of government intervention in the market.
Lamont reassured Hoover that there was absolutely no cause for concern, and the memo ended with the line, "The future appears brilliant." Five days later, the stock market crashed.
No one knows what triggered the sudden loss of confidence that happened at the end of Wednesday, 23rd of October. But out of nowhere, a sharp fall in automobile stocks provoked a frantic last hour's trading. Millions of shares were suddenly sold. The next day, the great crash of 1929 began.
October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday, is often considered to be the beginning of the crash. There was really a tremendous drop which scared a lot of people.
It is impossible to underestimate the shock, a sense of stunned disbelief. People panicked as the market just drops and drops and drops.
Desperate for news, thousands gathered outside the stock exchange.
Tremendous crowd standing there, very grimly staring ahead, men who had just been wiped out.
City officials are so alarmed by this that they send 400 mounted police, fearing that there's going to be a kind of Bastille-like invasion of the stock exchange.
And it's said that there was a strange murmur in the air, that there was a very, very strange kind of haunting sound, which must have been the cumulative voices of all of these people sharing their concerns.
The popular reaction is one of, this can't be happening.
A visitor from Britain was there that day too. Winston Churchill had invested much of his own money in the US stock market and had decided to pay a visit.
I happened to be walking down Wall Street at the worst moment of the panic, and a perfect stranger who recognized me invited me to enter the gallery of the stock exchange. I expected to see pandemonium, but the spectacle that met my eyes was one of surprising calm and orderliness. The 1,200 members of the stock exchange were walking to and fro like a slow-motion picture of a disturbed ant heap, offering each other enormous blocks of securities at a third of their own prices.
Churchill was to lose a fortune in the crash that day. Outside, the crowd continued to wait for news. Rumours were fueling the mounting panic.
Once the crash is underway, the real question becomes one of confidence. When you lose all confidence in the economy, good and bad go down together. And so the chief investment elite is at great pains to try to restore that confidence, to convince people that the economy and the stock market